My name is Emily Rhodes, and I was 20 years old the night my stepfather's boot smashed into my ribs with the kind of precision that only comes from repetition. I hit the concrete floor of our garage hard, the cold surface biting into my cheek as air rushed out of my lungs in a strangled gasp. The sound that followed was sharp and sickening, a crack deep inside my chest that felt like a thin branch snapping under too much weight. My breath vanished. I tried to inhale, but the pain rose in a vicious wave that folded me in half before I could understand what was happening. The metallic taste of blood spread across my tongue, even though he had not touched my face. He never touched the face. That had been one of his rules from the very beginning. Never where people could see. Everywhere else was his territory. His boots were heavy steel-tipped, smeared with grease and dried mud from the auto shop where he worked. I had memorized the pattern on the soles not by sight, but by the bruises they left behind. He nudged my side with his boot, not to hurt me, but to force me to move. "Stand up," he said, his tone sharp and impatient, like I was inconveniencing him by lying there. "You slipped. Remember, nothing more." My fingers curled against my ribs instinctively, as if my hands alone could keep the broken pieces from shifting. Black dots peppered my vision, drifting across my sight like flecks of ash. Everything smelled faintly of winter air seeping under the garage door motor oil and old paint. The world sounded muted, distant, like I was hearing it from underwater. From the doorway leading into the kitchen, my mother stood frozen. Laura Rhodes, with her dish towel still dangling from one hand, stared at me with wide, unfocused eyes. Her lips parted slightly as though she wanted to speak, but no words came. Her shoulders trembled. She looked smaller than I had ever seen her, as if Frank's shadow was swallowing her whole. "She fell," Frank said, talking to the air more than to her. "Again." My mother nodded automatically. She always nodded when Frank spoke, as though agreement was a reflex she no longer controlled. The dish towel slipped from her hand and landed softly on the kitchen tile. She did not move toward me. She did not crouch down to see if I was breathing. She did not whisper my name the way mothers do when fear rushes through them. She stood there like a witness too afraid to testify. I wanted to shout that I had not fallen, that Frank had lost his temper because I had not answered quickly enough when he asked about the missing socket wrench, that the kick had come before I could even turn around. I wanted my mother to hear the truth from my own mouth instead of from the man who had rewritten our reality one lie at a time. But when I tried to inhale, a bolt of fire ripped through my ribs, cutting the air short before it reached my lungs. No words could form. Frank crouched down, suddenly lowering himself until his face hovered inches from mine. His breath smelled like stale beer mixed with spearmint gum, his attempt to hide what he had promised my mother he would quit. His hand clamped around my upper arm, squeezing the muscle until it went numb. "Listen carefully," he murmured, his voice low enough that only I could hear. "You slipped in the garage while carrying a box. That is all. If you say anything else, you will make trouble for everyone, especially your mother." My stomach lurched. He always used my mother as the reason I should stay silent, and my mother always gave him the power without meaning to. The garage door rattled with a gust of wind from outside. Somewhere down the street a car engine revved. Life went on while mine shrank into a single point of pain and fear. Frank pulled me upright and my legs buckled beneath me. I caught myself on the edge of an old workbench, the rough wood scraping my palm. When my knees gave way again, he steadied me not out of concern, but because he needed me standing. He needed the lie to look believable. He looked over his shoulder at my mother. "Do not just stand there. Get the car keys." Her breath hitched. She hurried into the kitchen, nearly slipping on the fallen dish towel. She returned moments later, her face-pale eyes glassy with unshed tears. She held out the keys with a trembling hand. Frank tightened his grip on my arm. "The ER will ask questions if we take too long." I met my mother's eyes. She opened her mouth. For a moment, I thought she might finally say something true, something brave, something that might save me. Instead, she whispered, "Do not make him angry, Emily. Please, just say you fell." The words hit harder than Frank's boot. A loud car door slammed somewhere outside. Maybe a neighbor arriving home, maybe someone who would never know what was happening behind the thin walls of our garage. I tried once more to pull in a full breath. Pain exploded across my side like shattered glass. The room blurred. My vision dimmed. Frank tugged my arm again, impatient. "Come on." My mother turned away first. Frank followed, dragging me with him, and in that moment, as I struggled to stay conscious, one truth carved itself into the center of my memory. That night, my mother's silence hurt worse than the kick. Before the violence became a monthly routine, before bruises mapped the shape of Frank's temper across my body, there was a version of my life that felt almost normal. I was 14 when my father died in a highway collision just outside Duluth. His semi jackknifed on black ice, and the impact crushed the front of the cab before help could reach him. My mother told me the officers at the scene said he had not suffered long, but that was never the part I could hold on to. What stayed with me was the emptiness that wrapped around our house afterward, a silence so heavy it felt like another person living with us. My mother worked 2 jobs to keep us afloat, one at a diner during the morning rush, and the other stocking shelves at a local supermarket in the evening. I rarely saw her except for the few moments before she left for work and the few minutes after she came home exhausted. She would fall asleep on the couch with her shoes still on, sometimes forgetting dinner entirely. I did my homework on the coffee table, made cereal for myself, and learned how to do laundry because no one else was available to show me. We survived, but our lives were threadbare. I watched her grow smaller under the weight of grief and responsibility, her shoulders permanently hunched, as if the world had given her too much to hold. When my mother met Frank, she was 40 and looked 10 years older, worn down by bills that never stopped coming and the loneliness that had seeped in through every crack in our home. They met at a small church support group for widows and widowers. I had begged her not to go because I knew she hated being around strangers when she was vulnerable, but she insisted. She returned home that evening with a strange lightness in her face, a softness I had not seen since before the accident. She said there was a man who had shared his story about losing his brother and how he had rebuilt his life through faith and hard work. His name was Frank Dalton. The first time he came over, he brought a casserole that tasted like stale herbs and too much salt, but my mother smiled as if it were a gourmet meal. He complimented the framed family photo in the living room and asked me gentle questions about school and hobbies. He wore a clean shirt tucked into his jeans and had a warm, practiced smile. I remember thinking he seemed eager, maybe too eager, but I was used to seeing people through the lens of my father's absence. Anyone who made my mother laugh felt like a blessing. Frank started showing up more often, fixing little things around the house without being asked. A loose hinge on the kitchen cabinet, the clogged drain in the bathroom, the sputtering lawnmower. He always did these tasks with an air of cheerful competence, whistling while he worked, glancing at my mother for approval. She gave it to him every time. I did not see the signs that he expected gratitude in return, that every favor carried an invisible price. My mother did, but she ignored them. She said it felt good to have help again, to not do everything alone. He brought over bags of groceries, grilling supplies, and even a brand new toolbox he claimed my mother needed around the house. When he cooked hamburgers in the backyard one evening, my mother watched him the way a drowning person watches a lifeboat. I kept waiting for something to feel wrong, but all I felt was a strange discomfort I could not name. It was not fear, not yet. It was the sensation of someone stepping into a space that had belonged only to my mother, my father, and me. A week after my 17th birthday, my mother told me she and Frank were considering marriage. My stomach knotted, but I forced myself to smile. I told her I just wanted her to be happy. She hugged me with tears in her eyes. "He makes me feel safe again," she whispered. I wish she had looked closer at that feeling before she let him move into our home. At first, nothing changed. Frank kept up his pleasant routines, grilling chicken in the backyard, bringing home flowers from the discount bin at the supermarket, and telling me he was proud of the way I carried myself. But small things started to shift. He would correct the way I spoke to my mother, claiming I sounded ungrateful. He commented on the length of my showers, the volume of my music the time I came home from school. He called these comments guidance, a way to help me grow into a responsible adult. My mother seemed relieved to have someone taking the lead. She believed Frank's confidence was strength, the kind my father had once shown in different ways. I learned to adapt, to shrink myself so I would not upset him. I convinced myself he was trying to be a father figure, and fathers were supposed to be firm. I was too young and too lonely to recognize that what we welcomed into our home was not strength but control wearing a friendly mask. If I had understood that earlier, maybe my ribs would not have learned his lessons the hard way. The first time Frank hit me, I was 17, and it happened so fast and so quietly that I almost convinced myself afterward that it had not happened at all. It was a Saturday morning in early spring, the kind where the air still carried a bite, but sunlight finally had some warmth to it. My mother was working an extra shift at the diner, leaving Frank and me alone in the house for the first time since he had moved in. I remember feeling uneasy as soon as I woke up, a tightness in my chest that I could not explain. The coffee pot was already burbling when I stepped into the kitchen, its aroma drifting through the air. Frank liked his coffee black and scalding hot. I preferred mine with too much sugar, but he said real adults drank it straight. I did not argue. That morning, I tried to be helpful. I poured him a cup while he hunched over the kitchen table reading the newspaper. He grunted in acknowledgement, not quite a thank you, but not quite nothing either. I set the mug down gently beside him, but somehow my hand trembled, maybe from nerves, maybe from the way he watched me in silence. A few droplets splashed onto the table. Not much, barely noticeable. But it was enough. He looked up at me slow and deliberate, his expression unreadable. I opened my mouth to apologize, but before the words formed, his hand shot out and gripped my wrist. It felt like iron closing around bone. I gasped, startled more by the speed than the pain. He squeezed harder, his thumb pressing into the thin skin near the joint. The shock froze me. I had never imagined he would lay a hand on me in anger. He had never even raised his voice in a way that seemed threatening. Not until that moment. He leaned closer, his eyes narrowed, his jaw tight. "Hold the cup steady, Emily. Adults do not spill things." His tone was calm, too calm, the kind of calm that made every instinct in my body scream. His grip tightened and a bolt of pain shot up my arm, sharp and bright. I tried to pull away, but his fingers only dug deeper. My breath hitched. I could feel the blood pulsing through my wrist, trapped under the pressure of his hand. I whispered, "I am sorry. I really did not mean to spill it." The words felt small, thin, childish. He held on a moment longer, his eyes locked on mine. Then, just as suddenly as he had grabbed me, he released my wrist. The pain in my arm lingered, a dull throbbing that bloomed into a dark bruise over the next hour. He picked up the mug and took a slow sip, never breaking eye contact. Then he said something I would never forget. "Mistakes have consequences. Do not make the same ones twice." I stood there in shock, trying to understand what had just happened. I had made mistakes before, spilled things, broken things, said things too quickly or too sharply. My father had always taken those moments as opportunities to teach, to guide, to help me grow. Frank turned them into something else entirely. I went to my room and closed the door quietly, my wrist throbbing. I stared at the purple mark forming on my skin, its edges swelling. I pressed my fingers against it, testing the tenderness. It hurt, but what hurt more was the way he had looked at me like a teacher disciplining a stubborn student instead of a stepfather speaking to a girl he claimed to care about. I considered calling my mother, but she had already been gone for hours, and I knew she was exhausted. She needed the money from her extra shift. I imagined her face if I told her, the way her shoulders would slump, the way guilt would pull at her features. I convinced myself it had been my fault. I spilled the coffee. I should have been more careful. I should have held the cup tighter. By noon, I had convinced myself that Frank had only meant to correct me, not hurt me. I told myself it was a warning, a one-time thing. It had to be. When my mother came home that afternoon, carrying a bag of leftover fries from the diner, she greeted me with a tired smile. She did not notice the bruise until hours later when I reached across the dinner table for the salt. "What happened?" she asked, her eyebrows pulling together. I felt my heart lurch and my mind raced for a plausible explanation. Before I could answer, Frank spoke calmly from where he sat on the couch. "She bruises easy. Must have bumped into something." I froze. My mother looked at me. She wanted the truth. I could see it in her eyes, but I gave her the lie. "I guess I bumped into the counter," I said softly. "It must have been nothing." My mother nodded, but uncertainty flickered across her face. She set the salt shaker down and let the subject drop. Later that night, after she fell asleep on the couch, I sat on the edge of my bed and pressed ice against my wrist. I stared at the bruise, now deep purple and shaped unmistakably like fingers. A part of me wanted to believe it was a fluke, a moment of stress, a lapse in judgment. But another part of me, a quieter and more frightened part, knew it was not the last time he would touch me like that. I felt a shiver run through me, not from cold, but from a sense of something shifting, something dangerous settling into the bones of our home. It was the first bruise, the first lesson, and the beginning of a pattern I would spend years trying to survive. The bruise on my wrist faded after a week, but the memory of Frank's fingers digging into my skin took much longer to soften. I kept telling myself it had been a mistake, a moment of tension, an isolated incident. I repeated those excuses like prayers, hoping they would keep the truth from taking root inside me. But pain has a way of remembering even when the mind refuses to, and before long, my body carried the evidence of Frank's temper more clearly than any words I could have spoken. The pattern began subtly disguised as discipline wrapped in the language of responsibility and respect. The first escalation happened when I was taking out the trash one chilly autumn evening. The garbage bags were slick with condensation, and I dropped one on the driveway. It burst open, scattering coffee grounds and cardboard scraps across the concrete. I muttered a frustrated sigh and bent down to clean the mess. I did not hear Frank behind me until his hand clamped down on my wrist, the same wrist he had bruised months earlier. He yanked me upward with enough force to make my shoulder burn. "What did I tell you about carelessness?" he asked, his voice low and steady, the kind that made my stomach twist. I opened my mouth to answer, but the grip on my arm tightened. Before I could speak, he twisted my wrist sharply, and a jolt of white-hot pain shot up to my elbow. I cried out, dropping the trash grabber I had been using. Frank released me almost gently, like he had simply corrected a posture. "Watch what you are doing," he said. "You are not a child." My wrist swelled within hours. I hid it under long sleeves and told my mother I had stumbled on the driveway. She stared at me longer than usual, her eyes filled with thoughts she did not say out loud. The second escalation came less than a month later. I was carrying a stack of folded laundry to my room because my mother was working late again. Frank sat at the dining room table surrounded by car parts he was polishing. He hated mess and blamed it on me every time he created one. I tried to slip past quietly, but he stopped me with a single question. "Did you finish raking the backyard?" I paused, shifting the basket in my arms. "Not yet. I was planning to do it after folding these." He stood up slowly, his chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. I looked at my feet, not wanting to see the expression I knew would be there. Without warning, he grabbed the top edge of the laundry basket and yanked it downward. The force threw me off balance, and I stumbled forward. He caught my shoulder fingers digging into the joint with precision. "You do tasks when they need doing." "Emily," he said, his breath close to my ear. "Not when you feel like it." He squeezed harder. The pain ripped through my shoulder like a tearing seam, and my knees buckled. When he finally let go, I cradled my arm against my body. I could move it, but only barely, and every motion sent a dull ache pulsing through my shoulder blade. At dinner that night, I ate with my left hand, pretending the discomfort was minor. When my mother asked why I was so quiet, I told her I had pulled a muscle while lifting something heavy. She did not challenge the lie, but she looked at me the way someone looks at an injured animal they do not have the courage to save. By the time winter arrived, Frank's temper had carved a routine into our lives. It always began the same way. A small mistake, a perceived disrespect, a moment when my voice was too soft or too late. The consequences escalated, a shove that sent me into a table, a slap to the back of my shoulder that knocked the air out of me, a kick to the leg delivered with such calculated force that it left a deep yellow bruise shaped like the curve of his boot. Each month, the tension built until it exploded. My body learned to anticipate the cycle. I could sense it in the heaviness of the air, in the stiffness of my mother's posture, in the way Frank's footsteps grew sharper when he walked across the house. I felt it in the silence at the dinner table when my mother kept her eyes on her plate, and Frank tapped his fork against the ceramic in slow, rhythmic beats that made me want to disappear. Then came the night he cracked my ribs for the first time. I was in the kitchen washing dishes, exhausted from school and a part-time job at a coffee shop. Frank asked why I had not brought in the mail yet. I apologized and reached for a towel to dry my hands so I could get it immediately. But he did not wait. He stepped behind me and delivered a swift, controlled kick to my side. I gasped, the pain blooming instantly. I doubled over, gripping the counter. He watched me for a moment, his expression unreadable, then said, "You make things harder than they have to be." The pain was sharp at first, then heavy. Breathing became shallow. I hid in my room that night, telling myself it was a bruise. Only a bruise. It took nearly 2 weeks before I could take a full breath without wincing. By the time the second cracked rib happened, I no longer believed my own excuses. I learned to take shallow breaths when Frank was around, so he would not see the pain on my face. I learned to stay quiet, move slowly, and anticipate his moods. I learned to shrink myself. My mother watched everything unravel in silence. She became a ghost in her own home, floating from room to room with downcast eyes and trembling hands. Every time Frank raised his voice, she flinched. Every time he touched me, even casually, her shoulders tensed. I wanted to scream at her to stand up for me, for herself, for the girl she used to be. But I saw her fear too clearly. I saw the way Frank's presence drained the color from her face. I saw the way she apologized for things she did not do. I saw the way she avoided mirrors as if she could not bear to see the woman staring back at her. The monthly violence became the rhythm of our lives, the cruel calendar that dictated our days. But even then, I still believed it would not get worse. I thought I had reached the limit of what he could do to me. I was wrong. My mother's silence became its own presence in our home, as real and as suffocating as the man who caused it. It hovered in the corners of every room, drifting through the hallways like a cold draft, settling between us at the dinner table where conversations used to live. It was not the kind of silence that came from peace or comfort or mutual understanding. It was the silence of someone who had been frightened into stillness, someone who had learned that speaking invited danger. At first, I tried to justify it. I told myself she was exhausted from work, overwhelmed, grieving in her own way. But exhaustion cannot explain the way her eyes darted whenever Frank entered a room. Overwhelm cannot explain the way she pressed her lips together so tightly when he raised his voice that a thin white line formed at the corners of her mouth. Grief cannot explain the way she seemed to fold in on herself, as if pulling her body inward would make her invisible. Sometimes I would catch her watching me with a look so full of fear and guilt that I wanted to reach out and hug her, but then Frank would appear and she would drop her gaze to the floor. Shoulders tense, her breath shallow. She apologized for everything. For the mail arriving late. For the laundry not being folded fast enough. For the dishes not being rinsed properly. She apologized for asking Frank a simple question, for accidentally brushing past him in the hallway, for breathing too loudly when he was trying to watch television. It was as though she believed her mere existence was an inconvenience. I hated seeing her like that. I hated what he had done to her even more than what he had done to me. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon in late March when I finally realized that my mother was not just silent. She was trapped. I was coming down the hallway when I heard her voice faint and trembling from behind the partially closed bedroom door. She was whispering into the phone. Her words were clipped and hurried, whether from fear or urgency, I could not tell. I stepped closer, my heart pounding. I did not want to eavesdrop, but something in her tone made me freeze. She said, "I do not know what to do. I cannot leave. He will find us." Then she paused, listening. Her next words made the air leave my lungs. "Please, please send someone. He is getting worse." My stomach dropped. For a moment, I felt a surge of hope that she was finally asking for help, that maybe the silence had cracked enough for her to let someone know the truth. I took a small step toward the door. It creaked ever so slightly under my weight. She lifted her head. Our eyes met through the gap in the doorway. I opened my mouth to whisper Mom, but before I could say anything, her face went pale. She shook her head sharply, her expression pleading. She mouthed one word. "Go!" I hesitated, confused, frightened, not wanting to leave her alone. but she mouthed it again, more desperate this time. I turned and backed away, slipping into my room. I sat on the edge of my bed, heart-hammering hands trembling. She called for help. She actually called. I thought that had to mean something. Maybe she was finally ready to protect us. Maybe something would change. I heard footsteps, heavy ones. They moved down the hall with purpose. My door was cracked enough that I could see him. Frank. He strode straight to the bedroom, pushed the door open, and snatched the phone out of my mother's hands. She gasped, scrambling backward, her back hitting the wall. "Who are you talking to?" he demanded. His voice was cold and steady, the kind of voice that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. "No one," she whispered. "Just wrong number." The lie was weak, trembling, dying before it fully formed. Frank looked at the phone. He saw the partially dialed number. His eyes darkened. Without hesitation, he threw the phone against the wall. It shattered into pieces, the sound sharp and violent. My mother flinched so hard she looked like she might collapse. "If you ever think about calling anyone again," he said, his voice dropping to a chilling whisper, "you will regret it." I saw her shoulders curl inward, her hands trembling in her lap. She nodded rapidly, repeating, "I am sorry. I am sorry. I am sorry," like a broken record. Frank stepped closer, towering over her. His shadow fell across her like a blanket of darkness. She did not move. She did not breathe. She did not fight. She simply sat there small and silent, and I realized then that she had been trying to save us once. Just once. And he shut it down so violently that she lost whatever courage she had left. That moment replayed in my mind for days. Weeks. I could not shake the image of her pressed against the wall, her face drained of color, her hands shaking uncontrollably. I could not stop hearing her voice saying, "Please send someone." "He is getting worse." It was the proof I did not know. I needed the confirmation that she was not oblivious or careless or blind. She knew. She knew what he was doing. She saw the bruises. She heard the cries. She felt the tension. And she was terrified. It would have been easy to resent her, to blame her for not fighting harder, for not protecting me the way mothers are supposed to protect their children. But every time I tried to let myself feel angry, the image of her flattened against the wall after he smashed her phone silenced my resentment. She was not just afraid of what he might do to me. She was afraid of what he might do to her. And fear like that does not whisper. It roars. From that day on, the silence between us changed. It was no longer an absence of words. It was a barrier built from fear, guilt, and the shared knowledge of the danger living under our roof. Neither of us dared to break it. Neither of us knew how. Neither of us saw that it was already splintering. The day breathing became a battle started like any other in our house, with tension simmering quietly beneath the surface, waiting for the smallest spark to ignite it. It was early November, the kind of cold that seeps through windows and settles in your bones, even when the heater is running. I had come home from my afternoon shift at the coffee shop, my clothes still smelling faintly of roasted beans and vanilla syrup. My plan was to shower, eat something simple, and finish an online assignment before bed. I should have known better than to make plans. Frank was in the garage, the door half open, and the metal groaning softly in the wind. He was bent over the hood of our aging sedan, muttering under his breath as if the car had personally offended him. I hesitated at the doorway, hoping he was too focused on the engine to notice me. I tried to slip past quietly, heading toward the kitchen to grab a glass of water, but before I could reach the sink, his voice cut through the garage and into the house like a blade. "Emily, get in here!" The tone alone made my stomach drop. I walked to the garage, my fingers tightening around the cool glass in my hand. "What is it?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Frank straightened, wiping his hands on a rag that had long since lost its original color. He pointed to a cardboard box sitting near his feet. "Did you bring these in from the porch?" I glanced at the box. It looked familiar, like something my mother had ordered weeks ago but never opened. I nodded slowly. Yes, they were sitting in the rain. I did not want the contents getting ruined. He stared at me for a long moment, his jaw ticking. "So you took it upon yourself to decide what needed doing in this house?" His voice was calm, too calm, that same eerie quietness he used right before things turned violent. I opened my mouth to explain that I had only meant to help, but the words barely left my lips before he stepped forward and kicked the box. It slid across the concrete and hit the wall with a dull thud. His face darkened. "You always think you know better, do you?" He took another step toward me. I backed up instinctively, the glass trembling in my hand. "Frank, I was just trying to help." I did not think he moved so fast I barely saw it coming. One moment I was standing in the doorway, the next, his boot struck my side with brutal force, hitting the same place where faint pain still lingered from the last time he had lost his temper. The impact sent me flying sideways. My shoulder slammed into the wall. The glass slipped from my fingers and shattered on the concrete, the sound sharp and final. My body folded around the pane as I hit the ground. Air rushed out of my lungs in a desperate, wheezing gasp. It felt like someone had taken a hammer to my ribs. My vision blurred instantly, colors smearing together. My hearing faded, replaced by a high-pitched ringing. I tried to inhale, but every attempt felt like knives cutting through my chest. I collapsed onto my side, curling instinctively, my hands flying to my ribs. A wave of agony rolled through me, so intense I could not think, could not move, could not breathe. Frank stood over me, his face twisted with frustration rather than remorse. "Get up! You are being dramatic." I tried, but my body refused to obey. Every breath was nothing more than a shallow, broken gasp. A cold sweat formed on my forehead. My fingers trembled violently as I pressed my palm against the area where the kick had landed. The pain radiated outward, growing sharper with every heartbeat. My mother appeared in the doorway, drawn by the sound of breaking glass, or maybe by some instinct that finally screamed loud enough for her to hear. She froze, her eyes widening at the sight of me on the floor. Her hand flew to her mouth. "Emily, what happened?" Her voice cracked. She rushed toward me, but Frank stepped into her path with the ease of someone who had been blocking her movements for years. "She fell," he said flatly. "Again." My mother's eyes darted between my curled body and Frank's rigid posture. I could see the conflict on her face, the part of her that wanted to help me battling the part of her that had learned to survive through obedience. Frank planted his hands on his hips. "We need to take her to the ER. She probably cracked something again with her clumsiness." Again. The word echoed in my head. Again. As if my body breaking under his violence was a habit of mine. My mother tried to step around him. "Let me help her up." Frank grabbed her wrist and squeezed. "I said she fell." His voice was low, but the threat underneath it was unmistakable. My mother nodded shakily. Her shoulders drooped. Her voice dropped to a breath. "Emily, sweetie, it is okay. We will get you checked out." Her tone was gentle, but her hands trembled violently as she reached for me. I lifted my head slightly, tears blurring my vision. "Mom," I wheezed, but the rest of the sentence died in my throat. My lungs refused to expand. A stabbing pain shot through my side every time I tried to breathe deeper than a shallow sip of air. My mother's eyes filled with panic. Frank hovered above us, arms crossed, annoyance etched into every line of his face. "She needs a doctor," my mother whispered. "Now." Frank shrugged. "Then get her up." I could not stand. I could barely stay conscious. The edges of my vision darkened. I clutched my ribs, terrified by how unstable they felt under my fingers. My breaths came in rapid, shallow rasps that scraped against my throat. My body was shaking. My mother slid her arms under my shoulders, her voice trembling as she whispered, "I know it hurts. I know. Just breathe as much as you can." Her words felt fragile, stretched thin by fear and regret. I wanted to lean into her to trust her, but there was a part of me that could not forget she had been in the house for every injury. As she helped me into a sitting position, the pain flared so intensely that a choked cry escaped my lips. Frank rolled his eyes. "Enough theatrics. Let us go." That was when I realized it. My mother's eyes were no longer just filled with fear. They were filled with the dawning horror that this time something inside me had truly broken. She grabbed the car keys with trembling hands. She told Frank to open the passenger door, and for the first time, she did not ask his permission. In the car, every breath felt like a countdown. Every bump in the road made the pain spike sharply. My mother's hands clenched the steering wheel so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Her voice trembled as she whispered over and over, "Please, hold on, Emily. Please, hold on." It was the first time in years she said something he did not tell her to say. The night air outside was frigid, but inside the car, the heat of fear pressed down on both of us. And as the hospital lights came into view, glowing faintly in the distance, I knew deep in my bones that this night would change everything. The emergency room waiting area was nearly empty when my mother rushed me inside, her arm wrapped around my back as if she could hold me together with sheer will. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a harsh white glow that made everything look even colder than the November night outside. Each step sent a deep, pulsing ache through my side, and every breath I tried to take caught halfway, as though my ribs were refusing to expand. My mother called out for help, her voice cracking in a way I had not heard since the day of my father's funeral. A nurse behind the counter lifted her head. She was older, maybe in her early 60s, with gray hair pulled tightly into a bun, and a pair of reading glasses perched halfway down her nose. Her name tag read Clara Henderson. The moment she saw me, she stood up and came around the counter, moving with surprising speed for someone her age. "Sweetheart," she said gently, placing a steadying hand on my shoulder. "Let us get you into a room. Can you tell me what hurts?" I tried to respond, but the moment I opened my mouth, the pain in my ribs flared violently, cutting the air off. A whimper escaped instead. Clara's eyes softened, but I saw something else too, something sharper behind them. Recognition. Experience. She had seen injuries like mine before. She motioned for my mother to help her guide me into an exam room. The fluorescent lights reflected off the polished floor as we moved, and each step felt like a needle driven through my chest. Inside the small room, Clara helped ease me onto the bed. The paper beneath me crackled loudly in the quiet, sterile air. My mother hovered near the door, wringing her hands so tightly her skin turned pale. Clara reached for a blood pressure cuff, glancing at my mother as she asked, "What happened?" Her tone was calm, but there was a firmness beneath it, a quiet authority that made it impossible to look away. My mother inhaled sharply. "She fell in the garage, carrying boxes. Just clumsy." She tripped. The words spilled out like memorized lines. Clara did not even turn toward her. She kept her eyes on me, wrapping the cuff around my arm. "Is that true, sweetheart?" Her voice was warm, but there was no mistaking the challenge in her eyes. I stared at the floor and tried to breathe. The pressure of the cuff tightened around my arm, squeezing painfully. My heartbeat thudded irregularly in my chest. My mother rushed to fill the silence. "She is always tripping, always falling. She bruises easily." Clara finally turned her head slightly, her voice calm but razor sharp. I asked her, "Not you." My mother's lips parted as if she wanted to protest, but the words died before leaving her mouth. Clara finished with the blood pressure monitor and studied the numbers. She did not comment, but the slight tightening around her eyes told me they were not good. She placed 2 fingers gently on my wrist. When I flinched, she frowned. Pain there too, I swallowed my throat dry. It was hard to speak, hard to breathe, hard to think around the expanding pressure in my chest. I tried to inhale deeply, but the pain shot through me again and I gasped. Clara's head snapped up. "Do you feel pain when breathing?" I nodded barely. She stepped closer and spoke gently but with absolute seriousness. "I need to take a look at your ribs." I froze. My mother's eyes widened and she took a step forward. "Clara?" She whispered, her voice trembling. "She is just bruised. There is no need to do that. She only slipped." Clara raised her hand slowly with a calmness that carried more authority than any shout. "Ma'am, please step back. I need to examine her." My mother retreated a step, but her eyes were wide with panic. I knew that look. It was the same look she had worn the night Frank shattered her phone against the wall. Clara turned her attention back to me. "Lift your shirt for me, honey." I hesitated, my fingers trembling. Not because I was afraid of the nurse seeing, but because I was afraid of what she would say when she did. Slowly, painfully, I lifted the hem of my shirt. Clara's breath caught. It was a small, sharp sound, but it sliced through the silence. Her eyes widened, her expression shifting from concern to unmistakable horror. My torso was a map of bruises, each shade a different story. Deep purple blotches near my ribs, yellow fading bruises along my side, finger-shaped marks on my arms, a faint imprint of a belt buckle near my hip, and the most recent injury, the one that felt like fire, was already beginning to swell a dark bruise spreading like ink beneath my skin. Clara reached out and lightly touched the area near my ribs. When I sucked in a sharp breath of pain, she immediately withdrew her hand. "That is not from a fall," she said quietly, her voice tight with controlled anger. My mother flinched at the words. I saw tears fill her eyes. She shook her head, but she could not form a single sentence. Clara stood to her full height, her posture straight and firm. "I am ordering X-rays now." She pressed a button on the wall to call for a technician. My mother tried again, her voice shaky. "Clara, please, she is fine. She just needs rest." I watched the nurse turn toward her fully, her expression shifting to something colder. "Ma'am, your daughter has difficulty breathing. She has multiple bruises in different stages of healing, and she is in clear distress. X-rays are not optional." My mother's face crumpled and she looked down at the floor. I could see the fear shaking through her. Not fear for me, fear of Frank. Clara turned back to me. Her voice softened again. "Emily, can you walk?" Clara used my name for the first time, and something about that made the tears fill my eyes. I nodded, though the movement sent a wave of pain through my chest. She placed a steady hand on my back, guiding me gently. "We will take it slow. You are safe here." Safe. A word I had almost forgotten how to feel. I tried to believe her, but as we moved toward radiology, I could not shake the sinking feeling that safety was something Frank would not let me have without a fight. The walk to the radiology department felt like miles, even though it was just one floor up. Every step sent a new jolt of pain through my ribs, sharp enough to blur my vision. Clara kept her hand on my back as we moved down the hallway, guiding me with steady, purposeful steps. My mother trailed behind us, her breath shaky, her hands trembling. She looked at the ground instead of at me, instead of at the truth. The radiology wing was colder than the rest of the hospital, the kind of cold that seeped through my skin and deep into my bones. The technician, a quiet man in his late 30s with a calm expression, gestured toward the X-ray table. "Can you climb up here, Emily?" His voice was gentle, almost hesitant. I nodded, though the thought of lifting myself made my stomach tighten. Clara helped me onto the table, her touch firm but careful. The technician positioned the machine overhead, adjusting its height and angle. "Try not to move," he said as he stepped behind the protective barrier. "I will only take a few images." Not moving felt impossible. My body shook with each tiny breath. The machine clicked into place, and a soft humming noise filled the room. The sound felt both soothing and terrifying, like the calm before a storm. When the first flash of the X-ray hit, I felt nothing. Physically, but emotionally, it was as though the machine was peeling back layers of my life, exposing everything I had tried to hide. Clara stood behind the barrier as well, her eyes trained on me the entire time. She watched with a fierce kind of focus that made me want to cry. After a few minutes, the technician returned. "We need a side view," he said, helping me turn slowly. I winced as pain shot through my ribs again. Clara stepped forward. "Slow breaths, honey. You are doing well?" I did not feel like I was doing well. I felt like I was barely anchored to my own body, held together by pain and fear. When the last X-ray was taken, the technician nodded. "That is it. You can sit up." Clara helped me back onto my feet, her hand warm against my back. "We will take you back to your room while the images load," she said. The technician glanced at her with a look I did not understand, something heavy and knowing. Clara's jaw tightened. I could see she was preparing herself for whatever those images were going to show. As we walked back to the exam room, the lights seemed brighter, the hallway louder, the hospital colder. My mother followed, still silent, still shadowed by fear. When we returned, I sat carefully on the exam bed, trying not to breathe too deeply. Clara stepped out briefly, and when she returned, she had a stack of X-rays clipped to a light board she had wheeled into the room. The room fell silent. She flipped the switch and the board lit up. My entire world changed in that moment. There they were. My ribs splayed in stark black and white. Bones that should have been smooth and whole appeared cracked and fractured. Clara's eyes scanned the images with a practiced intensity. My mother stood behind her, hands clasped tightly together, knuckles pale, her breathing unsteady. Clara touched one of the bright white lines that appeared on the left side of my rib cage. This is fresh. She tapped another faint line next to it, and this one as well. 2 recent fractures. She moved her finger to a cluster of barely visible lines. Old injuries, healing at different stages, several. My mother's breath caught. Her body swayed slightly. Clara looked at her with a seriousness that felt like gravity. These injuries did not happen from a fall. She turned toward me, her voice gentler. Emily, these are the result of repeated trauma. My mother shook her head. No, she whispered. She falls. She has always fallen. The air left my body. Even now, even seeing the physical proof, she clung to the lie. Clara exhaled slowly. She stepped closer to my mother, not aggressively but firmly, her eyes steady and unwavering. These injuries cannot be explained by clumsiness. They show a pattern one I have seen before. I saw her swallow the last 2 words, but I knew what they were. Abuse cases. My chest tightened even more, and I could not tell if it was fear, shame, or relief. Clara turned toward me. Emily, I need you to tell me something. Has someone hurt you? I looked at the floor. My heart pounded inside my throat. I thought of Frank's face twisted with anger, his voice in my ear telling me mistakes have consequences, his boot hitting my ribs, my mother's silence, her trembling apologies, the threat he made the night he shattered her phone. The thought of answering Clara seemed impossible, but the X-rays had already spoken. Clara placed her hand on my arm. You are not in trouble. You are not alone. I am here to help you. Something inside my chest cracked again, but it was not a rib this time. It was something older, something buried under years of fear. I opened my mouth, but the air caught. I could not speak. Clara did not push. She simply looked at me with a depth of understanding that felt like a lifeline. Then she turned toward the door. I am calling the attending physician and hospital social worker. This is no longer just a medical situation. My mother's eyes widened. No, please. You do not understand. Frank will be angry. He will be furious. The words slipped out before she could stop them, and the moment they did, everything shifted. Clara's gaze hardened. There it is, she said softly. My mother clapped a hand over her mouth as tears began to spill. Clara turned to me again. You are safe now, I promise. She left the room briefly. My mother sank into the chair in the corner, her shoulders shaking. I stared at the X-rays, trying to absorb the fact that my pain had been visible to strangers before it had ever been visible to her. A few minutes later, the door opened and Dr. Hall entered, her eyes sharp and focused. She studied the images without speaking for nearly 30 seconds. When she finally turned toward me, her expression was a mixture of anger and compassion. Emily, she said calmly, these injuries are not accidental. Some are months old, some years. The words years felt like a punch. She stepped closer. I am reporting this. That is not optional. My mother covered her face with both hands, sobbing quietly. Dr. Hall looked at her with a mix of disappointment and sadness. Your daughter is in danger. The system must intervene. The word system made me think of police, courtrooms, consequences. My lungs tightened, panic rising. Dr. Hall placed a hand on my shoulder. We will protect you. The X-rays do not lie. They tell the story your voice has been too afraid to speak. And in that clinical room, under the hum of fluorescent lights, the truth finally became undeniable. The moment Dr. Hall confirmed she was reporting the injuries, the air in the exam room seemed to thicken as if the walls themselves understood the gravity of what was unfolding. My mother sat in the corner with her hands covering her face. her shoulders trembling under the weight of every lie she had told to protect Frank and every bruise she had pretended not to see. I sat on the exam bed, clutching the thin blanket draped over my lap, trying to take shallow breaths that would not ignite the stabbing pain in my ribs. Dr. Hall stepped to the computer mounted on the wall, her fingers moving quickly across the keyboard. She spoke while she worked her voice steady, matter-of-fact, but underscored with urgency. "I am contacting CPS and the police department now," she said. "Your injuries require mandatory reporting." The words mandatory reporting echoed in my skull like a warning bell. I had heard them before, whispered in hushed tones at school assemblies or mentioned briefly in health classes. But hearing them applied to my life, to my own battered ribs and fading bruises, felt surreal. My mother lifted her head slightly, her face streaked with tears. "Please," she whispered, "please do not call them. You do not understand what he will do." Dr. Hall paused only long enough to respond without losing her composure. "What he will do has already been done," she said firmly. "And it ends tonight." My mother's sobs quieted into a kind of stunned silence, her eyes staring at nothing. I swallowed hard. The room felt both too small and too large at once, closing in on me while stretching far beyond anything I could control. A soft knock came at the door, and then it opened slowly. The hospital social worker, a woman with warm brown skin and kind eyes, stepped inside. Her badge read Ms. Martinez. She carried a calm energy with her, as though she had walked into chaos too many times to be rattled by it. "Hello, Emily," she said softly. "I am here to help you." I nodded, but my hands shook. She sat in the chair next to the exam bed. "I would like to ask you a few questions," she said. "You do not have to answer anything you are not ready to talk about." I glanced at my mother, who stared at me with an expression I could not read. Something between terror and hope. Something between guilt and love. I could not tell which emotion weighed heavier. Ms. Martinez noticed my hesitation. She leaned a little closer. "You are safe here. No one can hurt you in this hospital." A part of me wanted to believe her, wanted to cling to that safety the way a drowning person clings to a floating piece of debris. But another part of me heard Frank's voice in my head, low and dangerous. "Mistakes have consequences." Ms. Martinez gently placed a folder on her lap. "Before I ask anything," she said, "there is something I need you to understand. Your X-rays paint a very clear picture. They show injuries over time. More than one, more than two. Patterns like that do not come from accidents." My mother let out a strangled noise but did not speak. Ms. Martinez continued, "We are not here to blame you or judge you. We are here to protect you." I lowered my gaze to my hands, twisting the thin blanket between my fingers. My throat felt tight. My voice was a locked door, and the key was buried under years of fear. Before I could find the courage to speak, the exam room door opened again. 2 police officers stepped inside. One was tall, with dark hair pulled into a tight bun beneath her cap. The other, a broad-shouldered man with soft brown eyes, closed the door quietly behind him. Dr. Hall greeted them with a nod. "Officers, thank you for coming so quickly. We have a minor with multiple suspicious injuries." The female officer stepped forward. "Emily, I am Officer Ramirez. My partner here is Officer Reynolds. We just want to make sure you are safe." I stiffened at the word minor. I was 20, legally an adult, but the physical and emotional power Frank held over me made me feel smaller, younger, more powerless than any legal definition could change. Officer Reynolds' voice was gentle. "Would you mind telling us what happened tonight?" I inhaled softly, and the pain stabbed through my ribs again, making me wince. My mother suddenly shot up from her seat. "She fell," she repeated desperately. "She fell. She slipped. She always does this." Dr. Hall turned on her. "Stop." The command was firm, startling enough to silence the room. "She fell is not an explanation that can account for 7 healed fractures and 2 fresh ones," she said. "We are past pretending." My mother sank back down, her hands covering her face. Officer Ramirez crouched so we were eye level. "Emily, we can only help you if you tell us the truth." I opened my mouth, but before I could speak, the door behind them swung open again with sudden force. Frank's voice thundered down the hallway. "Where is she?" My heart plummeted. My mother gasped. Officer Reynolds and Officer Ramirez rose instantly, stepping into a defensive formation. Footsteps approached fast. Heavy. Familiar. The door burst open and Frank appeared, his face contorted with a performance of concern. "Where is my daughter?" he demanded. "My wife said she was hurt. I came as soon as I could." He scanned the room until his eyes found me, his expression softened instantly, dripping with false compassion. "Emily, sweetheart, are you all right?" "What happened?" Dr. Hall stepped forward, blocking his view. "Sir, we are in the middle of a medical evaluation. We need you to step outside." Frank ignored her. He took a step closer. I saw the shift in his expression, the mask slipping, the anger rising. Officer Ramirez stepped between us. "Sir, I need you to remain where you are." Frank's jaw tightened. He pointed at me. "She always bruises. I told her to be careful. She does not listen. She never listens." Officer Reynolds stared at him. "Sir, is that how she got hurt?" Frank laughed. A short, bitter laugh. "She makes everything difficult. That is the problem." Officer Ramirez's eyes narrowed. "Is that a confession?" Frank's face snapped toward her. "No, I am saying she exaggerates. She is clumsy. Always has been." Something in his tone cracked. Rage spilled through. She should know better by now. The room went still. A silence so sudden and sharp that even my mother looked up. Ms. Martinez whispered under her breath, "That is it." Frank realized too late what he had said. His face paled. His mouth opened, but no excuse came. Officer Reynolds stepped forward. "Sir, please turn around. You are being detained pending investigation." "That is ridiculous," Frank snapped. "My daughter falls. She is weak. That is not my fault." Officer Ramirez raised her voice. "Now." Frank's eyes locked onto mine. Fury, control. The threat I knew too well. But this time, something was different. Something in his expression shifted the moment he realized I was not looking away. I was not shrinking back. I was not silent. The officers placed him in handcuffs. He kept staring at me, his expression venomous. "You will regret this, Emily." But for the first time, his words felt hollow. The system had been triggered, and the X-rays had spoken. Louder than him. Louder than my fear. Louder than my mother's silence. Frank's arrest should have been the end of it. A clean break, the moment the truth swallowed him whole. But men like Frank did not crumble so easily. They clung to control the way drowning men cling to drifting pieces of wood, and Frank had always believed the world belonged to him. Even in handcuffs, even surrounded by officers, he carried himself like the center of gravity. The hospital hallway seemed to bend around him as they escorted him away, his boots echoing in a steady, defiant rhythm. My mother sagged into the chair behind her, crying into her trembling hands. Dr. Hall stepped aside to speak with the officers privately. Ms. Martinez moved closer to me, gently resting her hand on the bed rail. "You did the hardest part," she whispered. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that telling the truth, even without speaking, even through the silent confession of my X-rays, meant the nightmare was finally ending. But fear clung to me, coiled tight and cold in my stomach. What if Frank got out? What if the system failed? What if the lie I had lived in for so long swallowed me again? Dr. Hall returned her expression unreadable. "Frank will be in custody until they finish processing tonight," she said. "After that, he may be released while the investigation continues, depending on the judge." "Released!" The word scraped against my ribs worse than the pain. My mother lifted her tear-stained face. "Released," she whispered. "He cannot come back here. He cannot." Ms. Martinez approached her, speaking gently. "A protective order will be filed immediately. He will not be allowed anywhere near either of you." My mother nodded weakly, though the fear still lived in her features, a shadow too deep to vanish with a promise. A moment later, a commotion outside the exam room caught everyone's attention. Heavy footsteps, raised voices, the officers' radios crackling to life. Dr. Hall's eyes narrowed. She stepped toward the doorway and looked out. When she turned back, her face was sharp with concern. "He is demanding to see her." My breath caught. I thought he was gone already. Officer Ramirez appeared in the doorway, her expression tight. He is being escorted out of the hospital, but he pushed past the doors. Says he has something to say to her. My mother stood up so quickly her chair clattered against the wall. No, she cried. He cannot come back in here. He cannot. Ms. Martinez put an arm around her, soothing her. It is all right. The officers have him. But before the reassurance could settle, Frank's voice boomed from down the hall, hitting the room like a physical force. Emily! His voice shook me. Even now, even held by police, he sounded like the man who had dominated every inch of my life inside that house. He sounded like someone who believed nothing could stop him. Emily, where are you? He struggled against the officers, his boots scraping the floor loudly. I could hear the strain in the police voices as they pulled him back. Sir, you need to calm down. Let go. Stand back. But Frank did not relent. Tell her to come out here right now. She needs to fix this. She needs to tell them it was a misunderstanding. My mother pressed herself against the wall, shaking violently. Dr. Hall stepped forward, blocking the doorway with her body, her posture straight as steel. Clara appeared behind her, her face etched with fury. The entire hallway erupted into noise. Officers shouted, Frank yelled, radios crackled, metal scraped, and then cutting through everything I heard the words that sealed his fate. I never meant to hurt her that bad. The corridor fell silent for a split second, stunned by the slip. Officer Reynolds reacted immediately. Sir, that is enough. You are under arrest for assault. You can tell it to the judge. Frank stiffened, his eyes widening as he realized what he had said. He tried to backtrack. I did not mean that. You heard me wrong. She just falls a lot. She trips. She is dramatic. My mother choked on a sob. Ms. Martinez stepped beside me. Did you hear that she whispered? That is a confession. But Frank kept rambling, frantic, now his voice breaking. If she listened better, if she respected the rules, none of this would have happened. He twisted toward the officers. You do not understand. She needs to learn. The final word cracked in the air like a slap. Learn! Dr. Hall's face paled with anger. Clara shook her head slowly, heartbreak and rage mixing in her expression. Officer Ramirez stepped forward. Sir, this conversation is being recorded by our body cams. Every word you have said will be entered into evidence. Reality finally broke over him. His swagger evaporated. He shut his mouth, but it was too late. 2 officers grabbed him by the arms and dragged him away from the doorway. He looked back at me, eyes burning with a twisted mix of betrayal and hatred. You will regret this, Emily. You hear me? You will regret this. For the first time in years, I did not feel fear when he said it. The threat sounded small, empty, like a dying flame. Officer Ramirez shut the door, blocking his voice from reaching me again. The room settled into a quiet hum, interrupted only by my mother's soft sobs and the machines monitoring my vital signs. Ms. Martinez exhaled slowly. The judge will see this, she said, and this changes everything. Dr. Hall nodded. He just handed us the proof we needed. Clara rested a hand on my shoulder, her expression gentle but fierce. You did nothing wrong, sweetheart. Nothing. I tried to breathe, but the tears rose too quickly, filling my throat. I covered my face with my hands and sobbed the kind of sob that shakes your whole body. It hurt. Every sound, every breath. But it was the first time in years the pain felt like part of a path leading somewhere other than back to Frank. My mother stepped toward me, uncertain, hesitant, her eyes filled with guilt and regret. I am so sorry, she whispered. I should have protected you. Her voice broke. I let him hurt you. Ms. Martinez took her hand gently. Right now, what matters is that she is safe. And tomorrow, everything begins to change. The system had been triggered. The truth had been caught on camera. And for the first time, Frank Dalton was not the only one with power in the room. The chaos outside my exam room eventually faded into distant echoes, swallowed by the hum of fluorescent lights and the steady beeping of the monitor beside my bed. My chest still throbbed with every shallow breath, each inhale reminding me that Frank's boot had left more than bruises this time. My mother sat in the corner, her arms wrapped around herself as though holding in all the pieces she feared might fall apart. She watched me with eyes that were red and raw, the weight of years of silence, carving deep lines across her face. Ms. Martinez remained beside the bed, calm and steady, waiting for the right moment to speak. Officer Ramirez and Officer Reynolds stood near the door, giving me space but not leaving as if they knew I needed their presence to make this moment possible. Doctor, Hall returned with the X-ray board, placing it gently on the counter. She did not need to say anything. The images had already spoken. All the lies, all the excuses, all the times my mother and I had rehearsed stories that were never true. Those hollow narratives had been shattered the moment the white fractures lit up beneath the hospital lights. Emily Miss Martinez said softly, "I need to ask you again. Has someone hurt you?" The question seemed to echo in the room, bouncing off the walls and pressing into my ribs harder than any kick Frank had ever given me. My throat tightened. Fear rose in my chest, threatening to choke me. I could hear Frank's voice in my mind. "You will regret this. You will regret this." My mother shifted forward her chair, scraping lightly against the floor. "Emily," she whispered. Her voice cracked. Her hands trembled in her lap. The look in her eyes was different now, stripped of denial, stripped of excuses. It was the look of someone who finally understood the cost of her silence. I wanted to be brave. I did. But the words felt trapped, locked behind every memory of Frank's hands on me, and every moment I had been too afraid to speak. My breath hitched, and I winced as the pain shot through my ribs again. Dr. Hall stepped closer, her expression gentle but resolute. "The truth will protect you," she said. "The truth will protect your mother, too." My mother covered her mouth with both hands, tears spilling freely. I knew she was terrified of what would happen next, but for the first time she did not try to stop me. She did not try to guide me toward another lie. She simply waited. Officer Ramirez lowered herself slightly enough to be eye level with me. "Emily, your safety is our priority. All you have to do is tell us what happened. You do not have to explain everything tonight. Just tell us the truth about today." My heart pounded so loudly I could hear it in my ears. The words pressed against my throat, fighting to be acknowledged. I felt a rush of cold air fill the room, as if the universe itself was holding its breath alongside me. I could hear my mother sobbing softly, whispering, "I am sorry," over and over again. Something in me shifted. Not loudly, not suddenly, but like the slow cracking of ice that has been waiting too long to break. I lifted my head. My voice was barely above a whisper, shaking and thin. "He broke my ribs." My mother gasped the sound, sharp and painful. I swallowed hard and forced myself to continue each word, scraping against the walls of fear inside me. "He broke them. All of them." Officer Ramirez's expression softened with a mix of empathy and quiet fury. "Thank you for telling us," she said. "You did the right thing." My mother reached for me, her fingers trembling, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Emily, my baby, I failed you." Her voice broke completely, and her body shook as she began to sob. For the first time, I did not pull away, but I also did not comfort her. I did not have the strength to hold her guilt. Not yet. Ms. Martinez stepped closer. "Emily," she said gently, "can you tell me who did this so I can document it clearly?" I closed my eyes, and Frank's face appeared instantly twisted in anger, his voice echoing his threats crawling across my skin like vines. But then I remembered the sound of his voice in the hallway just minutes earlier. I never meant to hurt her that bad. He had said it out loud, on camera. He had revealed himself, and for the first time he could not twist those words into something harmless. I opened my eyes. "Frank Dalton," I said, my voice gaining strength piece by piece. "My stepfather." Every word felt like a release, a breaking of chains I had worn for years. My mother let out a sob so deep it shook her entire body. I wanted to reach for her, but I could not. Not yet. Officer Reynolds wrote something down in his notebook. "Thank you, Emily. This will help us move forward quickly." Dr. Hall rested a hand lightly on my shoulder. "You are incredibly brave." Brave. The word felt foreign and familiar all at once. For years, I thought endurance was bravery, surviving quietly, enduring the cycle. But now, with my voice finally out in the open, I understood that bravery was not silent. It spoke, even through pain, even through fear. Dr. Hall looked at the officers. "You have everything you need for the immediate report." The officers nodded. "We do." Ms. Martinez touched my hand gently. "This is the first step," she said. "A big one. And you did it." My mother knelt beside the bed, her voice trembling as she whispered, "I will never be silent again." I wanted to believe her. I hoped time would let me. But in that moment, I was focused on one thing only. I had said the words, and once spoken, they could never be taken back. The morning after Frank's arrest arrived gray and heavy as though the sky itself had not slept. I woke in the hospital room with the stiff sheets rustling beneath me and the pain in my ribs reminding me that even freedom had a cost. My mother sat in the chair beside my bed, her posture slumped, her face pale from exhaustion. She had not slept, not really. I could see it in the way her hands trembled when she reached for her paper cup of cold coffee. When Ms. Martinez walked in that morning, her voice soft and even, she explained what would happen next. Frank would be held until his initial hearing. A temporary protective order would be filed immediately. And because my injuries were severe, because the x-rays showed years of trauma, because my mother had admitted fear, they needed a safe place for me to go. Safe place. The words felt both hopeful and foreign. My mother dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. "She can come home with me. Please. I can take care of her." Ms. Martinez shook her head gently. "Not yet. The house is still considered a potential crime scene. And we cannot risk Frank returning before the order is finalized." My mother's face crumpled. "I am her mother. I should protect her." Ms. Martinez kept her voice calm. "And you will. But we need a plan that keeps both of you safe." I stayed quiet, my fingers picking at the edge of the blanket. Then Ms. Martinez asked Emily, "Do you have family nearby, anyone who can take you in temporarily?" I thought back to the woman whose smile had always felt like a warm quilt on a cold day. Aunt Margaret, my mom's older sister. I had not seen her in nearly 2 years because Frank had slowly cut off everyone who made us feel strong or seen. But before that, she had been like a second mother to me. My mother lifted her head at the mention of her name. "I have not spoken to her in so long," she whispered. "She will take her," I said quickly. "I know she will." Ms. Martinez nodded. "Let us call her." My mother hesitated, then retrieved her cracked old phone. She typed Margaret's number into the dial pad with trembling hands. When her sister answered, her voice bright and warm, even through the static, my mother burst into tears. "Margaret, it is me. We need help." And just like I had known she would, Aunt Margaret did not hesitate. "Of course she can stay here. Bring her as soon as she is discharged. That house is not safe." My mother cried harder, repeating "thank you" over and over until her voice broke. After I was discharged later that afternoon, hospital staff helped me into a wheelchair and rolled me out to my mother's old sedan. Every small bump in the parking lot sent a painful ripple through my side. My mother drove with both hands gripping the wheels so tightly that her knuckles turned white. She watched the rearview mirror constantly as though expecting Frank's truck to appear behind us at any moment. When we arrived at Aunt Margaret's home, the porch light was already on, even though it was the middle of the day. She stood in the doorway, her soft gray sweater wrapped around her like armor. She looked older than I remembered, but just as warm. Her eyes widened when she saw me, and she hurried down the steps. "Oh, sweetheart," she said, pulling me into a gentle hug. I felt the tears well up instantly. The scent of her lavender laundry detergent hit me, and something inside me cracked open. It was the first place I had felt safe in years. My mother stepped behind us, her guilt radiating off her in waves. Margaret looked at her, her expression shifting. "You should have told me," she said softly but firmly. My mother broke down again. I was so scared. I did not know what to do. Margaret put a hand on her sister's shoulder. "You do now." Inside the house, everything felt soft. The light, the smells, even the air. It was the kind of home that held on to warmth. Margaret settled me onto the couch with careful hands. I could tell she was trying not to cry as she looked at my bruises. "Did he do all this?" Her voice tightened. My mother nodded slowly, her voice trembling. "For years." Margaret inhaled sharply, anger flickering through her eyes. She turned to me and knelt beside the couch. "You are safe here. You understand." I nodded. The weight in my chest shifted slightly. Not the pain, the fear. The fear was beginning to move. Over the next few hours, Margaret bustled around the house making tea, gathering blankets, setting up the guest room next to hers. My mother followed her, apologizing repeatedly sometimes, whispering, I did not know how bad it was, and sometimes just shaking. When I finally lay down in the guest bed, the sheets smelled like clean cotton and sunlight. I stared at the ceiling, listening to the comforting sounds of Margaret humming in the hallway and my mother trying to help without falling apart. Part of me wanted to sleep. Another part of me feared closing my eyes. Eventually, Margaret entered the room and sat on the edge of the bed. "You can stay as long as you need," she said. "No one will hurt you here. Not ever again." I blinked back tears. "Thank you," I whispered. She squeezed my hand. "Sweetheart," she said softly, "you should have been here long ago." When she stood to leave, she paused at the door. "Starting tomorrow, we will make a plan. For healing, for justice, for everything he took from you." As she stepped out, my mother lingered in the doorway, her silhouette framed in the soft hallway light. "Emily," she whispered, "I love you." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to forgive her. But forgiveness was not something I could give yet. I turned my face toward the window, watching the soft glow of the porch light against the night. I did not say anything. My mother's breath hitched. Then she whispered another apology and stepped away. That night, for the first time in years, I slept in a home where no one was watching me with anger in their eyes. But sleep did not come easily. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the garage, the kick, the lies, the X-rays glowing on the light board. But then I saw Margaret's face, and little by little, breath by breath, safety began to feel like something real. The next week unfolded with a strange mixture of quiet and chaos. Quiet inside Aunt Margaret's small, warm house, where the smell of homemade soup drifted through the air and soft blankets covered every chair. Chaos outside, where the world finally began to dig into the truth my mother and I had spent years burying. I spent most mornings resting in the guest room, my ribs wrapped tightly, every breath carefully measured. Margaret checked on me constantly, bringing tea or warm compresses, whispering reassurances I did not know how to fully accept yet. My mother came by every afternoon, her presence timid, her words heavy with remorse. Sometimes I let her sit beside me. Sometimes I asked for space. She never protested. She simply nodded and whispered, "I understand. I am trying." Meanwhile, the investigation moved forward faster than I expected. Officer Ramirez and Officer Reynolds visited the house several times, asking follow-up questions in gentle tones, always checking if I needed breaks. They reassured Margaret each time that we were safe here, that patrol cars would monitor the street regularly, while the protective order waited for the judge's signature. But the investigation was not limited to conversations. The police returned to our old house with a search warrant. They collected Frank's belt, the scuffed work boots he left by the back door, and the broken pieces of the phone he had smashed in front of my mother. They measured bruises. They photographed the garage floor. They recorded everything. When Officer Ramirez described some of what they found, Margaret's face twisted in anger so deep she had to step into the kitchen to calm herself. The most unexpected part, though, was what they discovered in Frank's background. They had interviewed neighbors, coworkers, and anyone familiar with him. Then one afternoon, Officer Reynolds arrived with a folder. He sat at the dining table with Margaret and me, his expression serious. "We found something sealed in his past," he said. Margaret stiffened. "Sealed, like sealed by the court?" Reynolds nodded. "Frank's ex-wife filed charges years ago. Domestic violence. Severe." I felt my stomach drop. I whispered, "He was married before." Margaret squeezed my hand. "He was married twice," before she corrected softly. "But your mother never knew," Officer Reynolds continued. "Those records were sealed because the victim requested privacy and left the state immediately afterward. We cannot access the details, but the existence of the file helps establish a pattern. Margaret shook her head slowly, her jaw tight. He did this before, to someone else, and now to Emily. My ribs throbbed, my throat tightened. I wanted to scream, to cry, to tear the air apart with the weight of it. He had hurt someone else, someone who escaped only because the system had protected her. But I had been trapped. Margaret's voice hardened. Does she know you are reopening this case? Officer Reynolds sighed. We do not know where she is, but the fact that she tried to seek help tells us she was in real danger, just like Emily. I felt tears fill my eyes, not because of the past, but because the future was finally shifting. Then something else emerged, something my mother had never told me. The day after the officer's visit, my mother arrived at Margaret's house looking like she had aged 10 years overnight. She sat beside me on the couch, wringing her hands. There is something you need to know, she said. Her voice trembled. I did try once. I lifted my head confused. Tried what? She swallowed. I tried to call the police, months ago. I stared at her in disbelief. When he had just hit you. You were cleaning up broken glass in the kitchen. You were crying. I called while he was in the shower. My chest tightened painfully. I remembered that night, the glass shattering, my shoulder throbbing, the sound of running water. She looked at her hands, her voice cracking. But he came out sooner than I expected. He heard me. He grabbed the phone. I could barely speak. Margaret placed a supportive hand on her shoulder. What did he do? He smashed it against the wall, my mother whispered. Then he grabbed me by the arm and told me if I ever called again. She stopped, unable to say the words. The memory alone shook her entire frame. I felt the breath leave my lungs. You never told me. I was scared, she whispered, and ashamed. I thought if I kept the peace, he would calm down. I thought if I stayed quiet, he would stop. But I was wrong. Tears slid down her cheeks. I failed you. I failed myself. I wanted to be angry. I wanted to blame her. But I also saw the way her hands shook, the way her shoulders sagged under the weight of her own guilt. I recognized that same fear. I had lived inside it too. Margaret cleared her throat, her voice steady and resolute. What matters now is that she came forward, and that changes everything. A few days later, Ms. Martinez visited with a printed timeline of my injuries. She sat beside me and opened the folder slowly as if preparing me for its impact. We have matched your x-rays to dates that correspond to the injuries, she said. She turned the pages so I could see. Each injury had its own entry. March 2nd, hairline fracture in the left rib. June 17th, bruised vertebrae. August 9th, fractured shoulder blade. And at the bottom, several older injuries stacked together, some more than 2 years old. My mother covered her mouth. My eyes blurred. Seeing them listed like that, clinical and detached, made my breath catch in my throat. Martinez turned the final page. This is where it becomes critical. She pointed to the last 2 dates. The day Frank kicked you in the garage and the previous rib fracture 3 months before. Those injuries tell a clear story. They show escalation, pattern, intent, and courts cannot ignore intent. Margaret exhaled relief and fury mixing together. So this will hold up in court. Martinez nodded. More than hold up. It builds a case so strong it will be nearly impossible to dispute. Then came the turning point. Officer Ramirez returned one evening with something she called the golden piece of evidence. The hospital hallway camera, the recording of Frank shouting, the recording of his confession. His words played in my mind. I never meant to hurt her that bad. That sentence alone, she said, will change the outcome entirely. My heart pounded as the weight of everything settled over me. Frank's past, his pattern, the sealed file, my mother's hidden attempt to report him, the timeline, the x-rays, the confession. Margaret squeezed my hand. Emily, she said softly, the truth is finally on your side. And as I sat there breathing shallowly through the pain, I realized something I had never understood before. It was not just that the system was working, it was that the truth had finally become louder than the fear. Preparing for court was nothing like what I imagined. It was not dramatic or fiery or cinematic. It was paperwork and questions and tears I did not expect to cry. It was long hours at Aunt Margaret's dining table, the wood worn soft from years of family dinners now covered with legal forms, printed emails, case notes, and copies of my x-rays that glowed harshly under the overhead light. It was quiet conversations with lawyers, whispered reassurances, and moments where I forgot how to breathe because the weight of everything felt unbearable. It began with the prosecutor assigned to my case, a sharp-eyed woman named Jenna Pierce, who showed up at Margaret's house with a leather folder tucked under her arm. She looked to be in her late 40s, her hair pulled back neatly, her expression calm but serious. She greeted Margaret politely, sat across from me, and laid out her materials. "First things first, Emily," she said, folding her hands. "I need you to understand that this will not be easy. Frank has rights. He will likely fight back. But we have a very strong case." She slid a stack of papers toward me. "These are your medical reports." The language was dry, but the content was devastating. Rib fractures, bruising, soft tissue trauma, repeated injuries consistent with blunt force impact. The words felt clinical detached, but each one represented a moment when I had curled around myself trying to protect my body from someone I should have been able to trust. Next, Jenna placed another stack on the table. "These are your photographs." I looked away instantly. I did not want to see the bruises, the swelling, the dark blotches on my torso and arms. But Jenna's voice softened. "I know it is difficult, but these will speak for you in court. Jurors respond to what they can see. Not everyone understands what abuse looks like. Some think it is always obvious. Some think victims always scream for help. But your photographs show the truth, and the truth is powerful." I nodded, even though my stomach twisted painfully. Then came the hardest part. Jenna set out a blank sheet of paper and a pen. "I need your victim impact statement. You can write it over time. You can take breaks, but we will use it at trial, or at sentencing if he tries to take a plea deal." The thought of putting everything into words made my throat tighten. My ribs ached as I took a shallow breath. I do not know where to start. Jenna leaned forward. "You start at the beginning or you start at the end. You write what happened or how it made you feel, or you simply write your name. There is no wrong way." My mother sat at the far end of the table, her hands twisting in her lap. She had been helping where she could, running errands, making dinner, calling the insurance company. But when it came to the case, she mostly watched guilt shadowing her face. Margaret stood behind me, her hands on my shoulders, steady and warm. "You do not need to do it all today," she whispered. "Just write one sentence." One sentence became two. Two became four. Before I knew it, tears blurred the ink on the page, but the words kept coming. Not everything, not the deepest memories, not the darkest moments, but enough. Enough to show what he had taken from me. Enough to show how afraid I had been. Enough to mark the beginning of my truth. After that, the legal meetings grew frequent. Detective Harris joined the team, a middle-aged man with a quiet voice and kind eyes. He sat across from me one afternoon with a thick binder in front of him. "We need to go through a timeline with you," he said, "not to re-traumatize you, but because the details matter. The defense will try to argue your injuries were accidents, or self-inflicted, or fabricated. We need to make sure there are no openings for them to twist your story." The thought of Frank's attorney suggesting I had done this to myself made me feel sick. But Detective Harris worked slowly, carefully. Each date he mentioned was accompanied by a gentle question. "Does this sound right? Is this what you remember?" I answered what I could, and when I could not, Margaret squeezed my hand, grounding me. Meanwhile, Margaret's home transformed into a war room of sorts. Papers were organized by date. A calendar marked upcoming meetings. Her phone buzzed constantly with updates from lawyers or officers or social workers. She handled it all with the poise of someone who refused to let fear win. My mother attended most meetings silently, her shame weighing heavily in the room. But one afternoon, she gathered the courage to speak. "I want to testify," she said quietly. All heads turned toward her. Jenna raised a brow. "Are you able to do that? It will not be easy." My mother looked at me, tears filling her eyes. I failed her. I did. I stood by and let it happen. But I will not stand by again. I nodded, unsure of how to feel. Part of me needed her to say it. Another part of me feared what Frank might do when he heard her testify against him. But the prosecutor smiled gently. Your testimony could be incredibly powerful. We will prepare you. And she did. Over the next few days, my mother sat with Jenna for hours, going over what she knew, what she had seen, what she had ignored. She cried often. She shook, but she answered every question. Then came the hospital staff. Dr. Hall confirmed she would testify about the X-rays, the timelines, the medical inconsistencies. Clara agreed to testify as well, her voice firm, when she said, I have seen enough victims to know when someone is being hurt at home. But the most powerful witness aside from the X-rays was something no one had expected. The hallway video. The recording that captured Frank's voice rising in anger, his words slurring into a confession. I never meant to hurt her that bad. When Jenna played the audio for us in Margaret's living room, the room fell silent. My heart pounded. My mother cried silently. Margaret closed her eyes. And Jenna said what we were all thinking. This is our anchor. This is what will hold him in place. This is what he cannot talk his way out of. Preparing for court meant preparing myself too. I practiced breathing slowly despite the pain. I practiced sitting upright for long periods. I practiced speaking without shaking too visibly. Some days progress felt small. Other days the weight of everything felt overwhelming. But every night when I lay in Margaret's guest bed, I reminded myself of one thing. Frank was no longer in our home. He no longer controlled every breath I took. The truth was out. The system was moving. And for the first time, justice felt possible. The morning of the trial felt like stepping into an entirely different world, one divided cleanly between the life I had lived before and the life I was about to enter. Aunt Margaret drove us downtown in her old Toyota, the heater humming softly as cold air pressed against the windows. My mother sat beside me in the back seat, twisting a tissue between her fingers, her breath shaky but determined. I stared out the window, watching the courthouse rise ahead of us, tall and solemn against the pale winter sky. My ribs still hurt sometimes when I moved too quickly, but the doctors said I was healing well. Healing enough to testify. Margaret parked the car and turned to look at me, her eyes firm but warm. You can do this. You already did the hardest part. I nodded, even though fear sat heavy in my throat, thick and unyielding. The courthouse steps stretched before us like a long climb out of everything we had endured. Inside the building, the air felt colder. Reporters stood near the entrance, their cameras dangling from their necks, their whispers threading through the hallway as if gossip were oxygen. A few of them glanced at me with quiet recognition. They knew my story. It had already begun spreading across local news. Young woman's X-rays reveal years of hidden abuse. A story like that traveled quickly, but the attention made my stomach twist. I did not want to be a headline. I wanted justice. Just justice. Attorney Jenna Pierce met us outside the courtroom doors. She wore a navy suit and carried a stack of notes, her expression focused and steady. Are you ready? I swallowed. As ready as I can be. She nodded. Good. Stay close to me. Only answer the questions asked. Do not let his attorney bait you. And remember, the truth is on your side. I repeated that sentence silently as we entered the courtroom. The room buzzed with low murmurs. Reporters sat in the back row, notebooks open, pens poised. The jury sat in their designated box, 12 strangers who would decide what happened to the man who had controlled my life for years. And then I saw him. Frank sat at the defense table in a pressed button-down shirt and neatly combed hair, looking smaller than I remembered, but still radiating the same cold confidence. His eyes met mine, and something sharp flickered there. Not fear, not remorse. Rage. Pure and focused. My mother stiffened beside me, gripping my arm lightly. Margaret stepped closer in silent solidarity. Frank turned to his attorney, whispering something quickly. The lawyer placed a hand on his shoulder, urging him to stay calm. Judge Whitfield entered the room, her black robe flowing behind her as she settled into her seat. Court is now in session. The opening statements began. Jenna stood and faced the jury with calm confidence. Ladies and gentlemen, this case is not about a single incident. This is about years of hidden violence. She explained the injuries, the fractures, the timelines, the lies Frank had fed to doctors, the way the x-rays told a story no one could deny. Then the defense attorney spoke. He painted me as clumsy, accident-prone, emotional. He hinted that I bruised easily, suggested I exaggerated, marginalized my truth. When he finished, he smiled thinly at me as if daring me to break. Then the witnesses were called. First was Nurse Clara. She approached the stand with her shoulders squared, her gray hair neatly pinned back. When she swore to tell the truth, her voice was unwavering. Jenna asked her to describe what she saw the night I arrived at the hospital. Clara answered with clarity, professionalism, and the kind of conviction that only comes from decades of caring for injured people. She described the bruises, the marks shaped like boot treads, the leather strap patterns that matched a belt, the older bruises in varying stages of healing. Falls cannot produce injuries of that pattern, she said firmly. Not of that consistency, not in those places. The defense attorney cross-examined her, but Clara did not waver. Next came Dr. Hall. She walked the jury through the x-rays, projecting them on a large screen at the front of the room. Broken bones glowed starkly against the black background. These 2 fractures are recent, she explained, pointing with a laser. And these 5 show distinct healing patterns consistent with injuries occurring over several years. The jury leaned forward as she spoke. Some looked horrified, some looked angry, some looked heartbroken. The defense attorney attempted to poke holes in her testimony. Could the fractures be from sports? Numb. From falls? Numb. From accidents? No. Finally, he asked, "Doctor, are you suggesting my client intentionally harmed his stepdaughter?" Dr. Hall's voice remained steady. "I am stating clearly that the injuries on these films are not accidental." The room fell silent except for the scratch of a reporter's pen. My mother testified next. She sat on the witness stand, trembling, her voice shaking as she admitted her fear, her denial, her guilt. She told the court how Frank controlled her, isolated her, threatened her. She described the night he destroyed her phone when she tried to get help. She sobbed openly, her shoulders shaking, her voice cracking as she said, "I thought keeping quiet would protect my family, but I was protecting the wrong person." Some jurors looked at her with sympathy, others with sadness. But they listened. Every word. Then it was my turn. My knees felt weak as I approached the witness stand. Margaret squeezed my shoulder once before I walked forward. My mother whispered, "I love you," but I could not look back. When I swore to tell the truth, my hands shook. Jenna began gently. "Emily, can you tell the jury what happened on the night you were taken to the hospital?" I swallowed hard. The room blurred for a moment, but I spoke. I told them about the garage, the kick, the pain that stole my breath, the years of fear, the moments of false peace, the cycle of apologies that meant nothing. I described the bruises, the broken bones, the nights I cried silently into my pillow so my mother would not hear and blame herself. The defense attorney waited until Jenna finished before he approached, confident and predatory. "Miss Rhodes," he said, looking down at his notes, "is it possible you simply bruised easily?" "No." "Did you ever exaggerate your injuries?" "No." "Could you have caused any of these injuries yourself?" "No." His frustration grew each time I refused to bend. Finally, he asked, "Did your stepfather ever say anything that suggested intent?" I hesitated. Then Jenna stood quickly. "Your Honor, before the witness answers, the prosecution would like to introduce Exhibit E, the hallway recording." The judge nodded. "Proceed." The room dimmed as the clip played. Frank's voice echoed through the speakers. "I never meant to hurt her that bad." Gasps filled the room. Frank's face turned a deep shade of red. He slammed his hand on the table. "That is not what I meant." The judge banged her gavel. "One more outburst and you will be removed from the courtroom." Reporters scribbled furiously. The defense attorney paled. The jury stared at Frank with a new understanding. Not of a misunderstood man, but of a dangerous one. The trial continued for another day, but the turning point had already happened. The evidence was overwhelming. The truth was undeniable. The final moment came when Jenna gave her closing statement. She held up one of my X-rays, illuminated by the light. These bones tell the story the defendant hoped would stay hidden. They speak even when fear silenced this young woman. The defendant abused her, repeatedly, intentionally, and now it is time for justice. When the jury left to deliberate, the room buzzed with tension. 20 minutes later, they returned. Guilty. On all counts. My mother sobbed with relief. Margaret wrapped an arm around me. Frank stared at me with pure hatred as deputies approached him. But there was nothing he could do. Nothing left for him to manipulate. Nothing left for him to destroy. I exhaled slowly, my ribs aching, and for the first time in years, the pain in my chest felt like healing instead of fear. When Judge Whitfield announced that it was time for my victim impact statement, the courtroom felt impossibly still, as though the very air had been waiting for this moment. My palms were damp, my throat tight, and every breath reminded me of the ribs that had been broken and healed and broken again. Margaret squeezed my hand gently before I stood. My mother whispered a trembling, "Go on, sweetheart," but her voice barely reached me. I walked toward the podium, slowly feeling dozens of eyes on my back. The jury, the reporters, the prosecutor, the defense attorney, and Frank, especially Frank. He sat in his collared shirt and shackles, pretending to look bored, but I could feel the tension rolling off him like heat from an engine. I set my statement on the podium, the paper shaking slightly in my hands. I inhaled, felt the familiar twinge in my side, and began reading. My name is Emily Rhodes. For years, I lived in a house where silence was the only way to survive. Each word tasted like iron and fear, but I pushed through. I told the court about the first time he hurt me, about the lies we told doctors, about the nights I held my breath at the sound of his footsteps. I talked about living in a constant state of bracing for the next outburst, the next shove, the next moment where I had to pretend everything was fine, even though my body told the truth in bruises and fractures. My voice wavered, but I kept going. I told them how I learned to hide pain so well that even my teachers believed I was fine, how I wore long sleeves in summer, how I pretended to drop things so no one would question the bruises on my wrists, how every apology from Frank came with conditions. Behave better, listen faster, be quieter, be smaller. The judge watched me carefully, her expression steady but compassionate. The jurors listened with heavy, somber eyes. I turned to the next page. The night he kicked me in the garage, I genuinely thought I might die, not because the pain was unbearable, though it was, but because I realized in that moment that if I died, the story would still be told his way. I paused to steady my breath. My mother quietly sobbed into her hands behind me. I continued. For 3 years, I lived with broken bones. But those breaks were not the worst part. The worst part was believing that no one would ever believe me. Frank's attorney shifted uncomfortably. Frank himself stiffened, jaw-clenched eyes fixed on me with a mixture of anger and something else. Something like fear he did not want to acknowledge. I lifted the final page, the one that had taken me the longest to write. The truth came out because of X-rays. Machines that do not lie. Machines that do not take sides. Machines that saw what the people around me could not or would not see. My ribs spoke when I could not. My bones told the story he tried to bury. I looked directly at Frank. He froze his glare, meeting mine. For years you told me no one would believe me, that I was weak, that I was dramatic, that I was the problem. I leaned closer to the microphone. But you were wrong. You did not count on the truth being stronger than your threats. A murmur moved through the courtroom. Reporters scribbled furiously. Frank's lips tightened, his knuckles whitening as he gripped the table. I stepped back slightly and looked toward the judge again. I want the court to know that I am healing. But healing does not erase what happened. Healing does not remove the memories of lying awake at night wondering how many breaths I had left. Healing does not give back the years I spent afraid of the sound of my own front door. But healing gives me something else. A future. A chance to rebuild. A chance to breathe without fear. My voice cracked only slightly. I looked toward Margaret, whose eyes glistened with pride. Then toward my mother, who mouthed, I'm sorry through tears. I folded the final sheet. And I promise this. I will never live in silence again. As I stepped away from the podium, my legs trembled, but the weight pressing against my ribs seemed lighter somehow. For a moment, I was afraid to look at Frank again, but I forced myself. And what I saw surprised me. Not triumph, not fury, not defiance, but defeat. A small hollowing in his expression where control had once lived. A deputy guided me back to my seat. My mother reached for my hand cautiously, as if unsure whether she deserved to. I let her take it. For that moment, it felt right. The judge thanked me for my statement and called for a brief recess. As the courtroom rose and buzzed with movement, I leaned back, exhaling slowly through the ache in my ribs. Speaking those words had cost me something, but it had given me something too. Power, voice, breath. When the recess ended and everyone filed back into the courtroom, the air felt denser, as if the walls themselves understood that the next moments would change the rest of my life. The judge returned to the bench, her expression grave but composed. Frank was led back into the room by two deputies. The chains around his wrists clinked softly as he sat down. He glanced at me for a split second, something wild simmering in his stare, but the weight of everything that had happened during the trial pressed down on him too heavily for him to hide it. The prosecutor returned to her table. My mother exhaled shakily. Margaret squeezed my hand. Then, Judge Whitfield lifted her gavel. Court is back in session. We will now move to sentencing. The courtroom grew silent. Even the reporters seemed to breathe quieter. The judge adjusted her glasses and looked directly at Frank. Mr. Dalton, you have been found guilty on all counts by a unanimous jury. The charges include aggravated assault, domestic battery, coercion, child endangerment, and obstruction. She paused as if giving the words time to settle. Frank's jaw tightened. His attorney placed a hand on his shoulder, but he shrugged it off. Before I announced the sentence, the judge continued, "Does the defendant wish to speak?" Frank stood slowly. I did not expect him to. His cuffs rattled. His attorney looked nervous, probably worried Frank would make things worse. Frank cleared his throat. His voice wavered just slightly. I did not mean to hurt her like that. She exaggerates. She always has. I did my best. She made things difficult. It was the same tired script he had used for years, but this time it sounded brittle, pathetic, stripped of authority. The judge held up a hand. I have heard enough. Frank sat furious and humiliated. The judge turned toward me briefly. Miss Rhodes, your courage helped bring the truth to light. Then she faced the courtroom. I have reviewed the evidence and considered the severity of the crimes. The repeated injuries, the escalating violence, the defendant's attempts to conceal the abuse, and the emotional trauma inflicted on the victim leave no doubt that this is one of the most serious domestic violence cases this court has seen in years. Margaret squeezed my hand harder. My mother held her breath. Frank stared at the table. For these reasons, the judge said, I hereby sentence you, Frank Dalton, to 25 years in state prison. You will not be eligible for parole for 18 years. A gasp rippled through the courtroom. My mother let out a sob of relief. Margaret's grip tightened on my hand. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. For a moment, everything blurred. Then the judge looked directly at Frank. You used your power to harm. You used your silence to control. You used your lies to cover violence. But truth has a way of rising, and in this courtroom truth prevailed. Frank stiffened as deputies approached him. His eyes flicked to me, burning with resentment, but something else was there too. Fear, because for once he could not intimidate me. He could not twist the narrative. He could not control what happened next. This was justice that he could not outrun. The deputies lifted him to his feet. His chains clinked again, louder this time. He muttered something under his breath that I could not hear, and it did not matter. He was escorted through a side door and out of the courtroom. Gone. Really gone. My mother pressed her hands to her mouth as tears streamed down her face. Margaret leaned her head against mine. You did it, sweetheart. You did it. The prosecutor approached me. You were incredibly strong up there, she said. The jury believed every word you said. And now you can start to rebuild your life. I nodded, though the reality of everything felt too big to fully process. Cameras flashed as reporters crowded outside the courtroom door. Their questions hit the air like hailstorm pellets. Emily, how do you feel about the verdict? Do you have anything to say to other victims? Do you believe the sentence was fair? Margaret shielded me with her body as we walked through my mother on the other side. I kept my eyes down the whirlwind of voices and camera shutters swirling around me. Outside, the winter sun hit my face. The cold breeze made my lungs ache a little, but the breath I drew in was deeper than the one I had taken outside that garage weeks before. A police officer guided us toward a quieter exit. When the doors closed behind us, the world felt suddenly still. My mother turned to me, tears streaking her cheeks. Emily, I am so sorry. I nodded softly. I know. She reached out hesitantly. This time I did not pull away. She wrapped her arms around me, careful not to squeeze too tight. I love you, she whispered into my hair. I love you so much. I let myself lean into her, feeling both the weight of what we had endured and the fragile beginnings of what could be rebuilt. Later, as Margaret drove us home, I stared out the window at the passing trees, the sunlight flashing between branches. For the first time in years, the world did not feel like it was closing in on me. It felt open, wide, possible. When we pulled into Margaret's driveway, she turned off the engine and placed a hand on my shoulder. Justice was served today, but the real healing starts now. I nodded slowly. I understood. Healing would not be sudden. It would not be clean. It would not erase what had been done, but it would be mine. My mother stepped out of the car and waited beside the porch, her arms wrapped around herself as though unsure where she fit into this new chapter. I joined her, inhaling the chilly evening air, and for the first time in a long time, my breath was full, steady, free. Healing did not arrive like a sunrise, bright and sudden and warm. It came slowly in small moments, spread across days and weeks, layered gently like the soft quilts Aunt Margaret kept folded at the end of the couch. The morning after Frank's sentencing, I woke to the sound of birds outside the window. For a moment, I lay perfectly still, waiting for the familiar thud of heavy footsteps in the hallway, the sharp creak of the garage door, the cold dread that usually followed me from sleep into consciousness. None of it came. The silence was soft, safe, new. My ribs still ached, but it was the kind of pain that reminded me I was healing, not breaking. Margaret knocked on the door lightly before easing it open. "Morning, sweetheart. I made oatmeal." The way she said it, gentle and practical, made something inside me unclench. It felt so normal. For a long time, normal had been something I thought belonged to other people. I joined her in the kitchen, moving slowly but more confidently than I had in weeks. My mother sat at the table, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug of tea. When she saw me, she gave a small, hesitant smile. "Morning, honey." I nodded in return. There was still distance between us, a delicate space made of pain and regret and slow rebuilding. But we were trying. Later that week, Ms. Martinez visited to check on me and explain the next steps in the aftermath of the trial. Her voice was calm, her presence reassuring. "CPS will be formally closing your case once your therapy plan is in place," she said, "and your mother will be attending her own counseling program." My mother nodded, her eyes steady for once. "I want to do whatever it takes, for her." I appreciated it. I really did. But forgiveness wasn't a switch I could flip. It was a process. After Ms. Martinez left, Margaret and I spent the afternoon rearranging the guest room to make it feel more like my own. She insisted I choose new bedding, something bright and soft. I picked a pale blue comforter that reminded me of calm ocean water, even though I had never lived near the sea. Margaret also hung a small shelf near the window, the perfect place for something special. And that something arrived sooner than expected. A week after the trial, Dr. Hall called to say my final follow-up X-ray was ready. Margaret drove me to the hospital, the same building where everything had begun to unravel and then fall into place. Walking through the automatic doors made my hands clammy. My ribs contracted slightly as though remembering the pain. But then I saw Nurse Clara in the hallway, her kind eyes lighting up the moment she recognized me. "Emily, look at you standing tall." Or trying to. I managed a laugh. She hugged me gently, careful to avoid squeezing too tightly. Then Dr. Hall entered the room and placed the new X-ray on the light board. "Your ribs have healed beautifully," she said, completely aligned, strong. I stared at the glowing image. White lines smooth and whole. Nothing broken, nothing cracked, nothing fractured. It was the first picture of my body that did not show harm. Only recovery. "Do you want to keep a copy?" Dr. Hall asked. I nodded. More than anything. A few days later, Margaret helped me frame it. She hung it on the shelf in my room, where morning sunlight made the black and white image glow warmly. When my mother saw it for the first time, she covered her mouth, tears streaming down her cheeks. "That picture saved you," she whispered. I touched the frame lightly. "No," I said softly. "The truth did." Therapy became a regular part of my life. Some sessions were quiet and reflective. Others were raw, heavy, and exhausting. My therapist, Dr. Patel, encouraged me to talk about the memories one layer at a time, never pushing faster than I could handle. "Healing is not about forgetting," she told me once. "It is about understanding your strength and rebuilding your life with intention." I believed her. Slowly. Some nights I still woke in a cold sweat, the echo of a garage door slamming lingering in my mind. But the nightmares came less often. And when they did, I knew they were not prophecies. They were only memories. My mother attended therapy too. She worked through years of fear denial and trauma of her own. She apologized often, sometimes too much. But with time, her apologies became less about guilt and more about rebuilding something real. One afternoon, months after the trial, she sat beside me on the porch. We watched the clouds drift lazily across the sky. "I know I can't change the past," she said quietly, "but I want to be someone you can trust in the future." I looked at her, studying her face, the new lines of determination etched into her features. "I think we're getting there," I said. And I meant it. When spring arrived, I started college classes part-time, nursing classes. Dr. Patel encouraged it. Margaret celebrated it. My mother cried proud tears over it. "You know," Margaret said one evening as I flipped through a thick anatomy textbook, "you would make an incredible nurse." "I hope so," I replied. I want to help people who went through what I did. I want them to feel seen, understood, believed. My mother placed a hand over mine. "You already have the heart for it." We spent many nights like that, the three of us at the dining table, the space where legal documents once sat, now covered with textbooks, notebooks, and teacups. The heaviness began to fade from the house, replaced with warmth and purpose. News stations eventually stopped running stories about the trial. The reporters stopped calling. The online articles slowed. But one headline still lived in my mind. "X-ray evidence ends years of abuse." I kept a printed copy in my drawer, not because I wanted to relive the pain, but because I wanted to remember the moment when truth finally became louder than fear. 6 months after the sentencing, Margaret surprised me with a small celebration. A healing party, she called it. Just a few people. Clara came. Dr. Hall stopped by. Ms. Martinez sent a card. Margaret decorated the dining room with soft lights and blue flowers. My mother baked a cake. When everyone gathered around the table laughing, sharing stories, I felt something warm and steady settle inside me. Not joy exactly. Something deeper. Peace. Later that night, when the house became quiet again, I stood in my room and looked at the framed X-ray. The one that showed healed ribs. The one that marked the moment everything changed. I touched the glass gently. These bones had survived things no one saw. They had carried stories no one believed. And now they were whole again. Just like I was trying to be. Healing one breath at a time. As I climbed into bed, the moonlight stretching softly across my blanket, I whispered to myself something I had not said in years. I am safe. And for the first time, the words felt true. Healing is something people talk about as if it arrives all at once, like a sudden rain after a long drought. But the truth is that healing is quieter than that, slower than that, and far more personal than anyone ever warns you. In the months that followed the trial, I learned that healing is a series of small choices you make every single day. Choices that seem insignificant until you look back and realize they've carried you miles from where you started. I learned it in the mornings when I woke up to the smell of coffee instead of the sound of a slammed garage door. I learned it during evenings spent on Aunt Margaret's porch, wrapped in a blanket listening to crickets instead of my own heartbeat pounding with fear. I learned it in the simple act of breathing without pain, without flinching, without expecting someone to take that breath away. I remember one afternoon in early summer when Margaret drove me to a quiet lake just outside town. The water was calm, reflecting the sky like a mirror. I sat on the grass with my toes buried in the warm earth, watching families, fish, and children chase each other near the shore. For the first time, I realized I wasn't looking over my shoulder. I wasn't waiting for danger to appear. I wasn't bracing for impact. I was simply existing. That alone felt like a victory. Healing also taught me about the kind of strength that doesn't roar, the kind that whispers. People often imagine survivors as fierce warriors, unbreakable, unshakable, standing tall after everything collapses. But I learned that strength sometimes looks like getting out of bed even when nightmares keep you up all night. Strength sometimes looks like attending therapy even when your chest tightens at the thought of revisiting old wounds. Strength sometimes looks like speaking in a trembling voice and telling the truth anyway. Dr. Patel once told me something I never forgot. Pain shapes us, but it doesn't have the right to define us unless we surrender that power to it. I wrote those words down on a sticky note and placed it on the corner of my mirror. Some days, I believed it. Other days, I read it over and over until it finally felt real again. Healing also taught me about forgiveness, a complicated word that people often misunderstand. For a long time, I thought forgiveness meant excusing what happened, pretending it didn't hurt, pretending it didn't matter. But forgiveness, I learned, is not about erasing the past. It's about refusing to let the past anchor you to a version of yourself built from fear. I still don't know if I've fully forgiven my mother, and maybe that's okay. Forgiveness isn't a finish line, it's a process. But I do know that she is trying, truly trying, and that matters. She calls me every evening now sometimes just to ask how my classes went, sometimes just to say goodnight. Her voice no longer shakes with guilt, but carries a gentle determination that tells me she is healing too. And then there is Margaret the lighthouse in the storm I didn't realize I needed until I washed up on her doorstep. She once told me that families are not defined by blood, but by the people who stand by you when the world feels too heavy to hold alone. She has been that person for me. On the day I passed my first anatomy exam in nursing school, she baked a chocolate cake with blue icing that read, "You are stronger than you know." I laughed so hard I cried, and she cried too, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand as she said she had never been more proud. Healing also taught me something unexpected, that justice, though powerful, isn't the same as closure. The day Frank was sentenced, the weight on my chest lifted, but it didn't disappear entirely. Justice gave me safety. It gave me breath. It gave me a chance. But closure came slowly in the ways my life began to fill with things other than fear. Closure came in late-night study sessions with cups of hot tea in the soft glow of lamplight against my textbook pages. Closure came in the friendships I built at school, people who knew me only as Emily, not as the girl with the X-rays on the news. Closure came in small acts of kindness, a warm meal, a shared laugh, a handwritten note left by my therapist reminding me that progress is not linear, but still progress. One evening, several months after the sentencing, I took out the framed X-ray from my shelf. I set it on my lap and studied the white lines glowing across the dark film. I traced the healed ribs with my eyes. Those bones had carried years of suffering, but they had also carried me through the moment when everything changed. They had spoken when I couldn't. They had become evidence of truth. And now they were whole again. Holding that image, I realized something important. Those healed bones weren't just a record of what happened. They were a promise. A promise that I could heal too. A promise that I could build a life defined not by what was done to me, but by who I chose to become. And I choose to become someone who helps others find their voice. Someone who listens when silence becomes heavy. Someone who sees the quiet signs of fear the way Clara and Dr. Hall once saw mine. Someone who stands in the light without apologizing for taking up space. Healing isn't perfect. I still have nights where memories chase me awake. I still jump at sudden noises. I still feel grief for the girl who spent years trying to earn gentleness from someone incapable of giving it. But each day, the world feels a little wider, a little kinder, a little more mine. As I sit here now writing this epilogue with a soft breeze drifting through the open window and sunlight warming my shoulders, I feel something I never thought I would feel again. Hope. Real hope. Hope for my future. Hope for my strength. Hope for anyone out there who thinks they are alone. I learned that healing isn't about forgetting. It's about reclaiming, rebuilding, breathing freely again, one breath at a time.